Hola clase. So, today I'd like to talk to you about using el imperfecto and el preterito together when we narrate events in the past or when we tell stories in the past. You'll recall that last week we did an inductive exercise where we figured out how and when the imperfecto is used. We reviewed the preterito several weeks ago already, and we also hinted last week at how the imperfect and the preterite would be used together to narrate in the past. Today I want to take that a step further and deepen our knowledge a little bit. So, let's talk first about el preterito, usos del preterito. We use the preterite tense to talk about completed actions in the past. Okay, this generally means that we give our actions a well-defined time frame. Okay, we say yesterday something happened, or 3 years ago something happened, and that means that it has a well-defined beginning and end. It's pretty clear for us. Usually, these actions are discrete; they're singular. However, we could have more than one of them lumped into a sentence. For example, we could say, hace 2 años hice 3 viajes a México. 2 years ago, I made 3 trips to Mexico. Okay, those are 3 separate trips. We gave them a definite time frame 2 years ago, so they all happened in the same year. But they were each discrete trips, and they each had a beginning and end point. All 3 of them were completed, so we use the preterite to talk about that. We use the preterite to narrate a story. What I mean by that is that we use the preterite to move our story forward, to tell the events in the story. We don't generally use the imperfect to move the plot along. That's what the preterite does. It creates the plot. So you'll recall that last week I pointed out to you that if you thought about the most boring novel you ever had to read for class, that it probably was a novel that had a whole lot of imperfect in it, because it had a lot of descriptions and background information and setting and hardly any plot. Okay, so it had very little preterite, in other words. If you think about a James Bond movie, for example, there's a whole lot of preterite there normally, because a lot of things happen, right? So that means that the preterite tense virtually always answers the question, what happened next? So if I say, for example, yo salí de mi casa, I walked outside, I left my house. I could say something like this that might answer the question, what happened next? Yo vi un carro, I saw a car. Okay, what happened next? El carro llegó, the car arrived. What happened next? El carro chocó con otro carro. Or maybe I would say something like el carro chocó con el mambo taxi. Remember the mambo taxi from our story. Okay, all of those events answered the question, what happened next? What happened next? I went outside. What happened next? I saw a car. What happened next? The car arrived. What happened next? The car hit another car. If I said something like it was sunny, for example, that doesn't really answer the question, what happened next now, does it? That would have to be in the imperfect, hacía sol. So, speaking of the imperfect, let's talk about los usos del imperfecto. We use the imperfect to describe actions or people in the past. So, descriptions are generally in the imperfect. If I'm talking about what color the car was, for example, that arrived. If I want to talk about the weather, like I just mentioned. If I want to describe the driver, those are all going to be done in the imperfect. We use the imperfect also to talk about habitual or ongoing actions in the past. The habitual actions, if you remember, were acciones repetidas, or repeated actions. Things like, cada semana yo iba a la biblioteca. Every week I would go, or I used to go to the library. Remember, we did. Now notice that when I say that, I didn't restrict the time frame like I did with my 3 trips to Mexico. I didn't say 2 years ago in that year. it's pretty unclear when it started and when it ended. In fact, I didn't give it any ending point at all. So that's the difference between how I would use the preterite to talk about something that happened more than once in the past, and to talk about a habitual or repeated action in the past using imperfect. Ongoing actions are also in the imperfect. So whenever you use was or were something ing, for example, yo corría, I was running. That's the imperfect, okay? Yo hablaba, I was talking. Okay? Which brings us to our next point, which is that we also use the imperfect when we talk about an action simultaneous with a past completed action. Generally, not always, this imperfect action or this imperfect ongoing action is interrupted by the completed action. For example, yo corría cuando mi madre me llamó. Okay? I was running when my mother called me. So I was running, ongoing action, interrupted by the call from my mother. I had to fumble for my cell phone and all that. Okay. Remember, you'll recall that last week when we were discussing this, I put a squiggly line on the board to indicate the ongoing action. I said, well, this is ongoing, and the slash that cut through it was the action that interrupted it. Remember that we can also have two simultaneous ongoing actions. We could say, yo corría y hablaba por teléfono. Okay, I was running and I was talking on my phone. Strange, but possible. Since we use the imperfect to describe actions or people in the past, that's going to include things like physical characteristics and conditions, mental or emotional states, weather, time, and age. So if I want to say how someone's feeling, if they're sick, estaba enfermo, for example. If I want to describe their physical characteristics, era inteligente, I'm going to use imperfect to do that generally. Let's talk about conjugaciones. Let's talk about our conjugations in the imperfect and review those. Okay, AR regular verbs. For AR regular verbs, remember that we take off the AR ending and we add aba, abas, aba, abamos. Notice that I put that one in red because there's the accent on the A. It's not abamos, it's abamos, abais, and aba. If we have an ER or IR regular verb, we take off the ER or IR and we add ia, ias, ia, íamos, íais, and iam. So now let's look at los verbos irregulares en el imperfecto. Remember that there are three irregular verbs in the imperfect: ir, ser, and ver. I'm going to say each conjugation. I'm going to leave a little space there, a little pause for you to repeat each of them. Notice that I have highlighted the two nosotros forms for ir and ser, íbamos and éramos, because they are accented differently from the other forms of each of those verbs. You want to pay close attention to that. Okay? So let's start with ir. Yo iba. Tú ibas. Ella iba. Nosotros íbamos. Vosotros ibais. Ellas iban. Now ser. Yo era. Tú eras. Él era. Nosotros éramos. Vosotros erais. Ellos eran. And now ver, to see. Yo veía. Tú veías. Usted veía. Nosotros veíamos. Vosotros veíais. Ellos veían. Or I should say, ustedes veían, to be consistent with that one. Okay, let's talk about some key terms. I alluded to these last week and we copied a few down. Some palabras claves que introducen el imperfecto. These are typical expressions that we see when imperfect is used. The first one, a menudo, often. Con frecuencia, similar, frequently. De vez en cuando, from time to time. Siempre, always. Cada año, okay, or cada anything, cada semana, cada mes, cada año, cada día. Okay, in this case we have cada año, every year. A veces, sometimes, at times. We could also use algunas veces and muchas veces. The following are expressions that we typically see when the preterite is being introduced. Ayer, yesterday. Anteayer or antier, either one is fine. The day before yesterday. Anoche, last night. La semana pasada, last week. El año pasado, last year. Una vez, once or one time. Notice that these indicate generally a well-defined time frame, okay? Where usually we're going to limit our action in time and give it completion. So, with this slide, we have some examples of how the preterite is used with some of those expressions that we just saw. I'm going to let you fill in. I'm going to let you pause here and fill in the verbs. I'm not hiding it from you. They're in the preterito in this case. We'll talk about why afterward. So go ahead and pause and complete the exercise. Okay, so now that you have filled in the verbs in the preterito, you should have Carlos llamó, with an accent on the O, of course. Nosotros viajamos. Marta y Teresa fueron al museo la semana pasada. Yo comí una hamburguesa grandísima anoche. Okay. Notice that the expressions that were used in italics were ayer, el año pasado, la semana pasada, and anoche. They correspond to some of the expressions that we had on the previous slide, which were all alerting us to the arrival of the preterito, right? That we're going to be using preterito. They're introducing preterito in some way. They're giving that well-defined time frame that we talked about. Ayer, el año pasado. Okay, here's some examples of how the imperfect is used with some of those expressions that we already talked about. Whoops, let me go back. I'm going to let you fill these in. Go ahead and pause and fill in your verbs in the imperfecto. Be careful with your conjugations. There's no reason to get them wrong. All you have to do is go back a little bit and watch the earlier slide with the prior slide with the conjugations if you don't remember. So go ahead and pause, and afterward we'll go through. Okay, you should have had in the first one, a menudo, mi familia y yo caminábamos, with an accent on the first day, first day of the ending, I should say, en el parque. Con frecuencia tú conducías a la playa. Cuando hacía mucho viento en las montañas, ellos tenían frío. Okay? Notice that in number one, there's a repeated or habitual action in the past, a menudo. In the second one, again, con frecuencia. And in the third one, we're talking about the weather and giving a description of the weather. So that, too, is imperfecto. Now I'm going to let you choose the best answer here. I want you to go ahead and pause here. Do these on your sheet of paper and bring them, have them ready for class tomorrow. We're going to discuss them tomorrow. So go ahead and pause and do those. Okay, now that you've completed that, I want you to try these here. Again, write down your answers on a separate sheet of paper. It labels your exercise carefully, and we're going to go through them tomorrow. And finally, try this